The high desert cut like glass against the lungs, the kind of air that burned sharp and clear. Dot. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Since morning, the wind had grown meaner, dragging a dry cold that could gnaw into bone if you lingered too long. Boone McAllister had no plans to stop until the dark settled in. He was riding north through the New Mexico territory, aiming for Santa Fe, trailing the old trade road, where he hoped to sell 2 cheap horses and maybe strike a better deal on another. At 34, Boone carried enough years in the saddle to read the land like second nature. He'd served as a cavalry scout during the war, then drifted west once the smoke cleared, surviving on trading guiding and the odd job rounding up strays for ranchers. The trail had carved him lean, wiry, and tough, the kind of muscle built by hard miles and fireside meals. Sun and sleepless nights had cut fine lines around his eyes. He preferred traveling alone, no ties, no weight of another man's fate hanging on him. Ever since his younger brother Jesse McAllister had died in a botched rustler chase, Boone had stopped letting anyone close. That day his eyes stayed on the horizon and the thick bank of clouds pushing down from the north. Snow might hit by nightfall. He figured on camping near the San Miguel River water for the stock cottonwoods for cover. That's when the sound reached him, a faint scuff across stone, irregular, too light for horses, too steady for deer. Boone reined in on a narrow stretch, hemmed by low ridges scanning the slope. 3 figures eased down from the rocks. Women Apache by their look. Barefoot, bruised hair tangled with beadwork, and leather ties, faces tight with hunger and cold. Their lips, cracked eyes, unblinking, fixed on him, as if testing whether he was salvation or another danger. Boone's hand slid to rest near the worn leather of his revolver, not drawing, just ready. Out here, hesitation killed. The tallest stepped forward, maybe mid-20s, bronze skin, shadowed by a fading bruise along her jaw. Even battered, she stood proud against the biting wind, long black hair braided with beadwork worn thin. Her dress was torn at the neck, the fabric hanging loose enough to show the hard line of her collarbone. Her voice came low and raw from thirst. "We go north. You take us. We obey you." Boone kept his face hard, though his eyes measured each of them. The second, barely more than a girl, had rags tied around her feet, eyes darting between him and the trail behind. The youngest, no more than 19, stood half-hidden, gaze guarded and wary. Trouble was trailing them. Boone felt it deep. Looking past their shoulders, he spotted faint boot prints scattered in the dust. "Who's back there?" he asked flatly. The tall one, Loretta Jane Hollis, glanced back before answering, voice clipped. "Bounty men. We ran. They follow." Boone's jaw hardened. He knew the type men who'd sell flesh to miners, or worse, if the price jingled right. These 3 had bolted from hell, and hell wasn't likely to give up the chase. He weighed what he carried, just enough food for himself to reach Santa Fe, maybe a spare day if he rationed. Water he could manage near the riverbeds. But 3 more mouths meant 3 times the risk, and if Wade Fletcher or any of his kind caught up, it'd be a bloody fight. Yet these women weren't begging. No tears, no pleas, just standing cold and hungry, waiting on his word. Finally, Boone gave a curt nod. "If you can keep up, follow." Loretta didn't show relief, only signaled the other 2, Clara Mae Whitlow and Savannah Rose McCoy, to move. They fell in behind his gelding, bare feet crunching on the frozen earth. Boone faced forward, keeping the horse at a steady walk. When he did glance back, Loretta's eyes were still on him, unreadable and steady as stone. The trail narrowed through a stand of junipers, the cold sharpening with every breath. Boone's mind turned to what came next shelter fire and how far he'd risk taking them. For now they shared the same road. That had to be enough. As dusk pulled long bars of shadow across the path, Boone steered the gelding west off the main trail toward a shallow cut he remembered from years back. The land dipped pinyon trees thick enough to break the wind. The women followed without a word, breath puffing in quick clouds. Boone noticed how Savannah's steps faltered, how Clara May limped rags soaked through, while Loretta touched their shoulders now and then, keeping them upright without breaking stride. When they reached the hollow, Boone swung down, tied the gelding, and circled the ground for sign. No tracks but theirs. He motioned them to sit, while he stripped branches, snapping wood, until the fire flared and snapped, pushing the edge off the cold. The youngest couldn't hide her stare at the flames, eyes locked, as if it had been days since she'd seen fire. Boone dug out jerky hardtack coffee and a skin of water. He handed the jerky to Loretta first. She broke a piece, passed it down to Clara May and Savannah, each eating in quick, careful bites. He poured water into a tin cup and passed it along. They drank in turn, none taking more than they dared. Boone McAllister sat back on his bedroll, the fire, throwing restless shadows across their faces. Names, he said, in a low voice. The eldest answered first, Loretta Jane Hollis. She motioned toward the one with rags bound to her feet. Clara May Whitlow, then to the youngest, Savannah Rose McCoy. Boone gave a small nod. Boone McAllister. There was a pause. Loretta's gaze held him steady. "You're headed to Santa Fe?" she asked. "That's right," Boone replied. "Trading horses, selling two, maybe buying one back if the deal's fair." What he didn't confess was that he'd been thinking of settling down for a spell, maybe finding a place of his own outside the city. Loretta's eyes flicked toward the dark beyond the fire. "The bounty men came from the south. They sell women sometimes to miners, sometimes to worse." Her words were calm, but heavy as stone. "They caught us at camp. We slipped away when they drank too deep." Boone listened in silence, his jaw tight, as he pictured Wade Fletcher and his ilk riding hard behind them. "You figure they'll keep on your trail?" he asked. "Yes," Loretta answered without hesitation. Boone's eyes swept over their torn dresses, their bruises the way they huddled for warmth. Santa Fe was 4, maybe 5 days off if they walked. Less on horseback, but he had only one gelding. That meant trading saddle time, slowing their pace, and being wide open to whoever tracked them. "You ride?" Boone asked. Loretta nodded. Clara May's nod was smaller, uncertain. Savannah only gave a slight shrug. Boone made his choice in silence, the way he always did. If they moved faster, their odds were better. If Wade Fletcher's gang caught them, it would be on his shoulders as much as theirs. "Tomorrow we trade places on the horse," he said. "We ride till we're out of reach." Loretta's face didn't change, but she gave a sharp nod. The night settled into quiet. The fire snapping every so often, the wind outside whispering through the pines with the scent of cold dirt. Boone felt their eyes on him now and then, but no one asked why he'd stepped in. Truth was, he wasn't sure himself. When the flames burned down to a low glow, he rose. "Get some rest. We ride at first light." He laid out a few paces away, hat pulled low, revolver close to hand. Sleep came uneasy, haunted by scattered boot prints, and the thought of men who wouldn't quit until they had what they wanted. And still, for the first time in years, he wasn't traveling alone. By dawn, the cold had sharpened frost, sheathing every blade of grass in white. Boone was already awake, steam curling from a tin cup of coffee as he studied the sky. Clear. No snow. That meant they could make ground. The women stirred at the last embers of the fire. Loretta stood first, brushing pine needles from her hair, then nudged Clara May and Savannah to rise. Boone noticed the way she kept her tone low but firm, the kind of voice that expected no argument. "We ride in turns," Boone said as he cinched the gelding's saddle. "One at a time. Every hour we switch. Whoever's walking keeps pace." Loretta didn't ask for her chance first. She simply took hold of the saddle horn, swung up with practiced ease. Boone checked the cinch and gave a short nod. Clara May and Savannah fell in beside him, boots and bare feet crunching over frost-hardened dirt. They kept the river on their left, Boone setting a pace just under a trot, fast enough to cover ground without breaking horse or people. His eyes swept the land behind them. By mid-morning, 2 dark specks moved across the pale horizon, too steady to be strays. He said nothing. No need to stir fear before it was time. An hour later, Loretta dismounted, passing the reins to Clara May, who hesitated before climbing into the saddle. She rode stiff knees clamped until the gelding's rhythm loosened her. Savannah walked beside Loretta, while Boone dropped back, catching pieces of their soft conversation. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone told him Loretta was pushing her sisters to hold steady. Near midday, Boone called a halt in a small wash where the wind died down. They shared the last of the jerky, each taking a sip from his canteen before he did. That's when Loretta asked what had been burning in her eyes since the night before. "Why do you help us?" Boone's reply came slow. "Because I've seen what happens when no one does." He didn't explain, and she didn't press, though her gaze lingered on him longer than before. Then they moved on, Savannah taking her turn in the saddle, her slight frame nearly swallowed by the horse's back. Boone led Loretta close behind the others, trailing. By afternoon, the wind shifted, carrying a bitter smoke from the south. Not campfire smoke, too harsh, too heavy. Boone didn't speak of it, only quickened the pace. By sundown, they'd covered more miles than he'd counted on, but the weight of pursuit still hung close. He chose a canyon for camp rock walls high enough to hide a fire's glow. When the flames flickered low, Boone finally told them, "I saw riders. They're still far, but they'll close if we linger." Loretta's face stayed steady. "Then we move tomorrow." It wasn't a plea, it was agreement. Boone nodded. The line between a man traveling alone and a man leading others was already fading. The canyon held the firelight tight, but Boone still banked it low. He lay down with his revolver close, not sleeping deep. Every stir of wind or shift of the gelding's hooves snapped Boone McAllister awake. Before dawn, he caught at a faint drumming of hooves carrying farther than any coyote's cry. Still distant, but closer than the night before. At first light, they were moving again. Frost glazed the earth every step, crunching like glass beneath their boots. Boone didn't waste words, only motioned for Loretta Jane Hollis to take the saddle first. Her sisters fell in behind, shoulders hunched against the bitter cold. They followed the river's bend for an hour before cutting west into the rough country where tracks didn't hold. Boone wanted to break the trail, make it harder for Wade Fletcher and the others to follow. He climbed ridges whenever he could, scanning the horizon. Each time the dark specks behind them looked larger. The pace gnawed at the women. By mid-morning, Clara May Whitlow's wrapped feet were bleeding through the cloth, and Savannah Rose McCoy stumbled more than once. Loretta kept her face forward, but Boone noticed how she slowed her stride to match her sisters, measuring how far they could go before someone broke down. They paused in a boulder field long enough for Boone to tear the last strip of cloth from his pack and bind Clara May's feet tighter. His calloused hands brushed hers as he tied the knots, and she gave him a quiet, grateful look without speaking. Loretta's eyes stayed on them. When Boone straightened, she stepped close, her voice low enough for him alone. "They won't stop, even if we reach town." "I know," Boone said, Then why take us? Because if I don't, I'll see your faces every time I close my eyes." Something shifted in her gaze, understanding or maybe respect. She didn't answer, just turned and called to her sisters in Apache. They rose without protest, falling back in line as Boone led them out of the rocks. By afternoon, the land grew crueler, sandstone ridges loose scree underfoot. The gelding climbed sure, but every step punished the women. Boone pushed them until the sun began to sink, choosing a narrow pass for camp, where both approaches lay open to his eye. That night they ate in silence until Loretta broke it. "Tomorrow, the horse for my sisters first." Boone studied her across the fire. "You sure?" "Yes. I can walk." He didn't argue. Her eyes carried the same hard edge he'd seen in scouts who wasted nothing on themselves. When they lay down, the wind carried faint voices from the south. Too far for words, but close enough to chill the chest. Boone's hand rested on his revolver as he watched the dark, knowing tomorrow would settle, whether they got clear or not. Before dawn, the wind shifted again. The sound of hooves, sharper, now closer, no guessing needed. Boone left the fire cold and had them moving under a pale sky. No breakfast, just a swallow of water apiece, and the hard truth that their hunters were less than a mile behind. From a high ridge, Boone counted them. 4 riders, all armed mounts, steady and slow, not rushing, confident they'd catch their quarry before nightfall. Boone slid down fast. We pushed through the ridge ahead. Rough ground, slows horses. Loretta nodded once, no wasted breath. She put Clara May in the saddle first, then Savannah. Boone led the gelding into a jagged pass where sandstone spires rose like broken teeth. The trail wound narrow, dangerous. By midday, the sun hammered down off pale stone. Sweat shone on the women's faces, but they didn't falter. Boone kept checking the rear. The riders still shadowed them, smaller now, but never gone. At a bend in the pass, Boone halted them in the shadow of a cliff wall. 5 minutes here." He poured water into the tin cup and handed it to Loretta first. She drank, then offered it back. "You?" she asked. "I'll take what's left." Their fingers brushed, and for the first time, she didn't pull away. The touch was brief, but enough to spark something unspoken. They pressed on. The ground steepened, forcing short bursts of climbing. Clara May's legs began to fail, and Boone dropped back, steadying her with a hand at the elbow until she found her footing. Savannah kept glancing over her shoulder, sharp eyes catching every flicker behind them. By late afternoon, they broke from the pass into high desert, scattered with prickly pear. Boone saw no riders for the first time all day, but he didn't trust it. They could be circling to cut them off. "We'll camp in the wash ahead. 1 fire small. By the time the light bled away, they'd made it." Boone sparked the flame's slow ears, straining beyond the crackle. Loretta sat across from him, her hair slipping loose from braids, the glow tracing dust and sweat along her neck. "Tomorrow," she asked. "Tomorrow we put enough ground between us that they can't catch the scent." Her mouth tightened, then gave a small nod. No relief, just the knowledge they'd lived another day. That night, Boone stayed awake longer than most, back braced against his pack eyes on the dark. Somewhere out there, Wade Fletcher and his men were plotting their next move. Closer now, Boone McAllister caught the flicker of Loretta Jane Hollis's eyes opening in the night, watching the dark the same way he did. He woke before first light, his back stiff from the wash floor's cold bite. The fire had burned down to faint orange embers, mesquite smoke still clinging to the air. He sat up, listening. At first, there was only the soft rhythm of the sisters' breathing under their blankets. Then it came the dull, steady thud of hooves far off, but closing. Boone rose, tightened the cinch on the gelding by feel. Up, he said quietly, nudging Loretta with the toe of his boot. She blinked awake, then roused Clara May Whitlow and Savannah Rose McCoy. Within minutes, their meager belongings were packed and the fire buried under dirt. They moved out before dawn's edge showed on the horizon. Boone kept them to a low trail between ridges north but edging west to break their scent. The air stayed dry, but sweat dampened his palms on the reins. By sunrise, he saw them 3 riders now spread wide, closing. "They're gaining," Boone said flatly. Loretta didn't flinch. "What will you do? Lose them in the narrows. Horses won't rush in there without snapping legs." By mid-morning, they reached the canyon mouth walls rising high enough to steal the light. The trail twisted tight rocks, jagged every turn, dangerous. Boone swung down, handed Loretta the reins. "Stay close to the wall. Keep moving no matter what you hear." She took the leather, without question, eyes locked on his. No fear, only quiet resolve. The canyon swallowed them, their steps echoing off stone. Hoofbeats thundered soon after, louder, closer. Boone waited until the first rider showed a silhouette in pale light. He raised his Colt, fired. The crack split the canyon sparks flying off rock above the horse's head. The animal reared, flinging the rider into dust. Shouts echoed. Boone fired again, not to kill but to scatter their charge. "Go!" His voice rolled through the walls. Loretta drove the gelding forward, Clara May and Savannah scrambling behind. Boone backed along the trail, squeezing off another shot that forced Wade Fletcher's crew to dismount. The instant they slowed, Boone turned running hard until he caught the women at the far end. They didn't stop until half a mile of open ground was behind them, dropping into another wash. Bent over hands, braced on his knees, Boone fought for breath. Loretta stood by the gelding chest, rising fast, eyes fixed on him. "You didn't shoot them," she said. "No need. Just had to make sure they're walking a while." Her gaze softened, less guarded, more certain. She stepped closer, offered the canteen. Their hands met, and neither pulled away quickly. "They'll come again," she said low. "Then we'll be ready," Boone replied. The wind rose carrying dust and sun-warmed stone. For now, the hunters trailed behind, not ahead. That was enough. The wash cut north for miles, its sandy floor swallowing tracks. Boone pushed the pace another hour, then slowed, listening. The pursuit was gone for now. It didn't mean Wade Fletcher had quit, only that they were regrouping. But distance meant breathing room. By midday, they stopped in the narrow shade of an overhang. The gelding drooped sides heaving from the climb. Boone rubbed his neck, then passed the reins to Savannah. "Keep him in the shade. Let him rest." Clara May sat down, peeling filthy rags from her feet. Boone crouched beside her, studied the raw skin. "We'll find you better wrappings in Santa Fe," he said. She answered only with a wary, grateful look. Boone tore strips from an old shirt, bound her feet, again snug. Loretta watched, face unreadable. When Boone rose, she stepped close, voice low so her sisters couldn't hear. "You could leave us now. We can walk alone." "I'm not leaving you," Boone said, flat and certain. Her eyes searched him for doubt. Finding none, she gave a small nod, let it go. They moved on in the heat, swapping saddle time each hour. Boone noticed Loretta never claimed more than her share, even when her step faltered. By late day, they climbed a ridge with a wide view. No riders, no dust. They camped in a shallow bowl with clean sight lines. Boone built the fire low, just enough for coffee softening the last of the hardtack. The sisters ate quieter now, the edge of fear dulling less ready to run. Afterward, Boone stepped out to read the land as the light bled away. Loretta followed footsteps soft on sand. At the rise, they stood together, the horizon a black line, with the last sun fading. "You think they're gone?" she asked. "No," Boone said. "But we've got a lead." She turned to him. "You keep saying we. That's what it is now." Silence stretched between them, different now, less about survival, more about choice. When his hand brushed hers, she didn't pull away. She let her hand linger, their fingers resting together as the night settled over the land. When they returned to camp, nothing was said, but Loretta Jane Hollis sat a little nearer to Boone McAllister at the fire, and her sisters noticed. Boone felt the shift, too, something he hadn't counted on, but something he wasn't about to turn away. They slept beneath a wide, frozen sky, and for the first time since this journey began, Boone felt the weight in his chest ease enough that he drifted off without his hand on the revolver. Morning came pale and quiet, no sign of danger. Boone had them moving before the sun cleared the ridge, steady but not punishing. The wash widened into open ground where sagebrush and wiry grass grew between scattered rock. From the crest of a rise, Boone saw the faint spine of mountains marking the road into Santa Fe 3 days. If the weather held, maybe less, if they pushed hard. "We'll stay west of the main trail," Boone told Loretta as they walked side by side. "Keeps us out of sight. We'll ride in from the hills." She nodded. "And if they're waiting there, then I'll find another way in. Either way, we're close enough they can't take us without being seen." By midday, the wind eased, though it still carried winter's bite. They paused only long enough to drink and let the gelding graze. Clara May Whitlow's feet held better with the fresh wrappings, and Savannah Rose McCoy sat the saddle with her chin high, scanning the horizon the same way Boone did. He noticed, but said nothing. They made camp early that evening, in a hollow ringed with stone. The wind died with the sun, leaving a stillness that felt strange after so many days of flight. Boone built a small fire, brewed coffee, and the sisters finished the last scraps of jerky. Quiet held until the gelding's ears twitched south. Boone rose, listening hard. Then it came a hoof fall, slow and deliberate. Loretta rose too, eyes cutting to his. "Who?" she whispered. "Could be," Boone muttered. He slipped off into the rocks, moving low, keeping to the shadows. Through a gap, he saw him a lone rider watching from a distance. The man didn't advance, didn't raise a weapon, just sat his horse a long moment before turning back into the dark. Boone returned to the fire. "We're still being watched. Maybe just keeping eyes on us tonight." Loretta's jaw tightened. "Then we don't sleep." But they did eventually. Boone took first watch, Loretta the second. When he passed it to her, their hands touched in the firelight, and she didn't let go right away. He sat beside her before lying down close enough that her shoulder's warmth brushed his. Neither spoke, but the distance between them was gone. The night passed quiet, and at dawn Boone knew the last stretch would decide it. Santa Fe lay near, close enough to taste, but the risk of one final strike was heavy. They broke camp in silence, each carrying the same unspoken truth. They moved before the sun rose high, the mountains sharper, now pines scattered across their lower slopes. Boone kept them west, away from the main road. Clara May walked beside him when the silence broke the thunder of hooves at full run. From behind a ridge, 3 riders burst into view, 2 with rifles, 1 with a rope swinging from his saddle horn. They'd waited for open ground. "Go," Boone snapped. Loretta hauled Savannah from the saddle and shoved her forward with Clara May. Boone spurred the gelding hard, wheeling it toward the oncoming men. His revolver already in hand, he cut an angle that forced them to split. The first shot he fired struck dirt under the lead rider's mount, sending the animal skidding sideways. Boone used the moment to swing across, placing himself between the women and the others. One fired wild, the bullet whining past his ear. Boone answered with a clean shot that hit the man high in the shoulder, throwing him from the saddle. The last rider reined up hard, weighing his chances. 3 women and 1 hard-eyed cowboy. Was it worth dying for? Boone leveled his gun, gaze fixed. The man spat, yanked his reins, and turned south at a gallop. Boone didn't chase. He reined in slow, scanning the field. One man groaned where he'd fallen, his wound keeping him out of the fight. Another lay still breathing, but unmoving. Boone turned back to the women. "They're done," he said. "They won't ride again." Loretta's eyes held his, the tension in her shoulders easing at last. "You sure she asked?" "Yes." His voice left no room for doubt. By late afternoon, they reached the outskirts of Santa Fe. The scattered buildings, the clatter of wagon wheels. It was the first true taste of safety since they'd met. Boone led them in on the west road, stopping near a small corral where Ezra Boone kept spare stock. "You can stay here in town," Boone said, looking at each of them. "Find work, make a place for yourselves." Or his eyes met Loretta's. "Or you can come with me. I've got land east of here. It's quiet. Safe." Clara May and Savannah looked to Loretta first. She stepped closer to Boone. "We came this far with you. We stay." It wasn't a plea, it was her decision. Boone felt it settle deep in his chest, solid as bedrock. He gave a short nod, the kind that marked something final. That night they slept in town, warm food in their bellies for the first time in days. Boone bought boots for Clara May clothes and blankets for all 3. At first light, they rode out together toward the land he'd left untended too long. As the hills rose behind them and the town faded, Loretta reached across and laid her hand on Boone's arm. He covered it with his own, and this time neither looked away. The road ahead was theirs, and whatever came after, they'd face it together. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West, stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you.